On a winter evening in 1943, Nikola Tesla died alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker hotel. The man who had helped illuminate the modern world spent his final years in a fading Manhattan tower that had once claimed to be the tallest hotel on Earth. His body lay undiscovered for a day behind a "Do Not Disturb" sign. When staff finally entered, they found him in bed, hands folded, arranged with deliberate precision. Within hours, federal agents arrived to seize his papers. The hotel continued operating as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. This is the story of a building that promised permanence and delivered something far more fragile. It was a palace raised during an age of excess, matured through depression and war, and eventually became a refuge for the desperate, the displaced, and the eccentric. To understand Tesla's final days, it is necessary to understand the hotel itself. That tower did not exist until 1929. New York City in the 1920s was locked in a vertical race. Each year produced taller structures. Steel frames climbed higher into the sky. Developers competed for records that would be broken within months. The skyline shifted constantly as construction crews worked through harsh winters to add floors that briefly claimed the title of tallest before another project surpassed them. Hotels joined this contest with particular intensity. The decade brought an explosion of lodging construction as investors recognized that business travelers and tourists required accommodation in a city, becoming the commercial center of the world. The Hotel McAlpin opened in 1912 with 500 rooms. The Hotel Pennsylvania followed in 1919 with 200 rooms. Each claimed to be the largest in the world, and each held that title only until the next giant opened its doors. The boom had economic logic. Prohibition began in 1920, yet Manhattan remained the entertainment capital of America. Broadway theaters filled nightly. Jazz clubs operated quietly in basement speakeasies. Wealthy visitors arrived by train at Pennsylvania Station, seeking rooms within walking distance. Business conventions packed hotels for weeks. Demand appeared endless. Developers borrowed aggressively to finance construction. Banks competed to fund projects, promising steady returns from room rates and restaurant revenue. The mathematics seemed simple. A hotel with 2,000 rooms charging $3 per night could repay its loans within a decade. After that, profits would accumulate steadily. Entrepreneur Mac Canner recognized the opportunity. Having built apartment houses and commercial properties across Manhattan, he began assembling parcels along 8th Avenue between 34th and 35th Streets in 1927. The location offered strategic advantages. Pennsylvania Station stood 2 blocks south. The garment district surrounded the site, bringing daily traffic of workers and buyers. The land was costly, but obtainable. Canner hired the architectural firm Sugarman and Berger and brought in Ralph Thomas Walker as consulting architect. Walker had designed the Barclay Vasey building for the New York Telephone Company in a bold Art Deco style that blended modern engineering with decorative character. He shaped the exterior identity of the new tower. The design called for 43 stories rising from a base that filled the entire block. The structure would contain 503 rooms, surpassing competitors to become the largest hotel in the world. It would rise 512 feet from street to roof, making it the tallest hotel structure on Earth at the time. Height signified ambition and modernity in a city where both carried immense value. Walker clad the exterior in brick, concentrating Art Deco ornament at the crown. Terracotta panels depicted stylized eagles and geometric forms. Vertical lines emphasized height, guiding the eye toward upper setbacks, required by zoning laws. The tower would be visible from blocks away, a beacon for travelers arriving by rail or taxi. Construction began in 1928. Existing buildings were demolished, debris cleared, and foundations poured to support the immense weight of a 43-story tower. Once the base was complete, the steel frame rose swiftly. Crews added floors at a pace that impressed onlookers watching from neighboring rooftops. The interior proved even more ambitious. Every room included a private bathroom, still a luxury in 1928 when many hotels relied on shared facilities. Each room contained a radio, an innovation few rivals could match. Ice water flowed on tap through a centralized refrigeration system, representing cutting-edge mechanical design. Cork and mineral wool insulated walls to reduce sound transfer between rooms. The hotel offered multiple restaurants, grand ballrooms for conventions and social events, barber shops, beauty parlors, and even a hospital floor with operating rooms. In the basement, a printing plant produced menus and promotional materials. The building functioned as a vertical city, allowing guests to arrive and remain inside for every service they required. Financing relied on complex mortgages and bond arrangements totaling nearly $23 million. An extraordinary investment, reflecting the scale and sophistication of the project. Investors anticipated steady returns from room rentals, dining revenue, and ground floor retail leases. The projections suggested profitability within 10 years. By early 1929, the steel frame stood complete. Windows were installed through spring and summer. Interior finishes progressed on lower floors, while upper levels were enclosed. The schedule was aggressive. Canner aimed to open before year's end, to capture winter travel and convention season. In October 1929, financial markets faltered. On October 24, prices fell sharply. Panic selling intensified. By October 29, the stock market crash erased billions in paper wealth. Banks that had funded real estate developments faced cascading defaults. The economic boom fueling hotel construction collapsed almost overnight. Despite the turmoil, construction continued. The project was too advanced to abandon. A closed building generated no income. An open one at least offered possibility. By December, the structure was ready. The grand opening was scheduled for January 2, 1930. The debut drew crowds despite spreading anxiety. Guests attended a gala dinner and toured the building's mechanical marvels. Orchestras performed in the ballrooms. Reporters admired the refrigeration system and the novelty of radios in every room. The hotel stood as a showcase of modern engineering. At 5 feet, it officially held the title of tallest hotel in the world. The claim was accurate and would remain so for several years. Yet as unemployment climbed and businesses shuttered across Manhattan, the triumph felt muted. The New Yorker opened at precisely the wrong historical moment. Early months tested the optimistic projections. Occupancy lagged. Convention bookings declined as companies cut travel budgets. Restaurant revenue softened. The Great Depression gripped the nation with startling speed, and the hospitality industry felt the shock immediately. Still, the hotel endured. Its location near Pennsylvania Station ensured a steady flow of travelers. Its modern features distinguished it from older competitors. Guests who could afford Manhattan accommodations gravitated toward the newest and tallest option available. The radio in every room became a powerful marketing symbol of progress. Private bathrooms and chilled running water justified premium rates. By the end of 1930, the New Yorker Hotel stood as both monument and warning. It embodied ambition, engineering brilliance, and the peril of building for a future that vanished before opening day. Years later, within its towering walls, Nikola Tesla would spend his final nights, a visionary residing in a structure that mirrored his own life. Magnificent in conception, isolated in its later years, and shaped by forces far beyond its control. Height no longer mattered as much as survival. The early 1930s tested every assumption Mac Canner had made about hotel economics at the New Yorker Hotel. Room rates fell as competition for a shrinking pool of guests intensified. Hotels across Manhattan offered steep discounts that eroded profit margins. The New Yorker kept its rates higher than many rivals, defending them with modern amenities. Yet occupancy lagged behind projections. Empty rooms produced no income, no matter how impressive the tower looked from 8th Avenue. Management responded with aggressive marketing. Advertisements highlighted the features that distinguished the hotel from older competitors. A radio in every room became a central selling point in newspaper and magazine campaigns. Ice water on tap earned mentions in travel guides. Private bathrooms, still uncommon in many establishments built before the 1920s, gave the New Yorker a measurable advantage with guests who could afford selectivity. Convention business provided a stabilizing force. Trade associations and professional organizations continued holding annual meetings despite the economic collapse. They required large ballrooms and dining spaces capable of serving hundreds at once. The New Yorker's vast scale worked in its favor. Engineering societies, medical associations, and business groups booked multi-day events that filled guest rooms and restaurants simultaneously. The hotel also benefited from its connection to broadcasting. Shortly after opening, NBC established studios inside the building. Live programs originated from the premises, bringing performers, announcers, and technicians through the lobby daily. Listeners across the nation heard broadcasts announced from the New Yorker Hotel in New York City. The partnership reinforced the building's image as a symbol of technological progress. The systems within the tower were genuinely advanced. The centralized refrigeration plant delivered ice water throughout 503 rooms, an engineering achievement few buildings attempted at that scale. Heating and cooling systems improved comfort compared with older hotels. Electrical infrastructure supported radios, lighting, elevators, and heavy mechanical equipment across 43 stories without the instability common in earlier high-rises. Innovation carried costs. The refrigeration plant consumed vast amounts of electricity. Boilers burned coal delivered by truck and stored in basement bunkers. Skilled technicians were required to maintain the complex systems. Even as revenue declined, operating expenses remained stubbornly high. Staff reductions reduced payroll, but a building of that size demanded minimum staffing levels regardless of occupancy. In 1931, Canner refinanced the property. The original financial structure had assumed room rates and occupancy levels that no longer reflected economic reality. Banks holding the mortgages were themselves under pressure as defaults spread through real estate portfolios. Negotiations proved difficult. The revised terms provided temporary relief but increased interest obligations and shifted partial control to creditors. The hotel had become a heavy burden for all involved. Despite financial strain, the New Yorker continued attracting notable guests. Celebrities visiting Manhattan appreciated its modern luxury and central location. Politicians attending events booked rooms there. European travelers arriving at Hudson River piers found it convenient and impressive. The guest registry featured names frequently seen in national newspapers. In 1933, the inauguration of Franklin D. Roosevelt ushered in a measure of renewed optimism. New Deal policies aimed to stabilize banks and reduce unemployment. Immediate panic eased, even though recovery remained incomplete. Hotels such as the New Yorker survived through resilience, reputation, and modest competitive advantages. It was new enough to feel modern yet established enough to endure the worst early shocks of the Depression. By the mid-1930s, gradual improvement appeared. Occupancy rose modestly. Room rates stabilized. Convention bookings remained steady. The hotel was not flourishing, but the threat of foreclosure receded. Management preserved standards that kept the property competitive. Lobbies were polished, restaurants maintained quality, and mechanical systems operated reliably. Guests received the level of service promised in advertisements. The building increasingly housed long-term residents. Upper floors became home to individuals who chose hotel living over traditional apartments. Some were elderly. Others were professionals who traveled frequently and preferred the convenience of hotel services. A few were eccentric individuals with sufficient means to afford extended stays, but not enough to purchase Manhattan property. The hotel negotiated reduced monthly rates for these residents. A room that cost $4 per night for a transient guest might lease for $60 per month under a long-term agreement. Residents gained stability, housekeeping, and access to dining facilities. The hotel filled otherwise vacant rooms and secured predictable monthly income, buffering seasonal fluctuations. This dual identity as both transient hotel and residential building defined the New Yorker's character. Its immense size allowed both populations to coexist with minimal friction. Permanent residents occupied higher floors. Separate elevator banks and designated dining areas maintained order. The system functioned because the building had been designed with capacity far exceeding Depression-era demand. By 1935, the hotel had survived 5 years of economic catastrophe. Profits envisioned during construction had not materialized, yet the structure endured. Rooms were occupied, restaurants operated, mechanical systems functioned. In a decade that saw countless businesses collapse and buildings abandoned across Manhattan, endurance equaled achievement. The hotel's reputation evolved. It was no longer the newest or most fashionable address. Wealthier travelers gravitated toward icons such as Waldorf Astoria, New York, or the Plaza Hotel, for their established social prestige. The New Yorker offered dependable quality at reasonable prices. Amenities once considered extravagant became industry standards. Radios and private bathrooms grew commonplace. Ice water on tap shifted from marvel to expectation. What remained distinctive was solid construction, central location near Pennsylvania Station, and sheer scale. The building could operate at 60% occupancy and still cover expenses. Smaller hotels required near full capacity to survive. The New Yorker's vastness, initially perceived as excessive, became its advantage. Empty rooms on upper floors did not prevent profitable operation below. The structure was too large to collapse entirely under temporary strain. By the late 1930s, stability returned. Occupancy exceeded 70% during peak seasons. Convention schedules filled. Recovery remained incomplete nationwide. But the hotel had weathered the storm through location, size, and modest modernity. The guest registry during this period reflected American prominence. Politicians used the hotel for discretion and convenience when traveling to Manhattan. Entertainers booked rooms between performances. Musicians appearing at Radio City Music Hall or Carnegie Hall chose its proximity to Midtown theaters. Notable figures passed through its doors. Bob Hope stayed there. Benny Goodman booked rooms during engagements. Visiting baseball teams lodged at the hotel when playing the Yankees or Giants. Early in his career, Joe DiMaggio stayed at the New Yorker. Staff grew accustomed to seeing celebrated faces in elevators and dining rooms. The building also served as a platform for technological experimentation. In 1936, engineers from RCA demonstrated early television systems in one of the ballrooms. Experimental equipment transmitted test images to receivers arranged around the space. Engineers, investors, and journalists attended to witness a glimpse of broadcasting's future. Commercial television remained years away. Yet the New Yorker positioned itself as a venue where innovation unfolded. Mechanical systems continued to draw professional interest. Trade publications described the refrigeration plant that produced chilled water, circulating through miles of piping. Guests simply turned a tap labeled ice water and received water cold enough to eliminate the need for separate ice delivery. The system consumed tremendous electricity, but delivered consistent performance throughout 503 rooms. By the end of the decade, the New Yorker Hotel stood not as a symbol of unchecked ambition, but as proof of endurance. It had adapted to economic collapse, redefined its identity, and transformed excess capacity into resilience. In an era when survival eclipsed spectacle, the building's greatest achievement was remaining open. The air handling systems were equally sophisticated. The New Yorker Hotel had been designed with ventilation as a priority. Fresh air entered through rooftop intakes, passed through filters and conditioning units, and then moved through ductwork hidden inside walls and ceilings. Exhaust vents removed stale air and kitchen odors. The system did not meet modern definitions of full air conditioning, yet it surpassed the open windows and electric fans that most buildings depended on during summer heat. Service standards remained high because management understood that reputation relied on consistency. The dining rooms served meals comparable to respected independent restaurants. Experienced cooks prepared food in quantities that would overwhelm smaller establishments. On a typical evening, as many as 800 dinners were served across multiple dining areas. A centralized commissary system handled bulk deliveries of raw ingredients, processed and stored them in basement facilities, and distributed supplies to kitchens as required. Efficiency controlled costs while preserving quality. Maintaining these standards required hundreds of employees. Housekeepers cleaned rooms daily. Bellhops carried luggage and handled errands. Front desk clerks processed a steady flow of arrivals and departures. Operators staffed the telephone switchboard around the clock, connecting calls and providing wake-up service. Maintenance crews repaired plumbing, replaced light fixtures, and kept mechanical systems functioning. The building operated as a small city, sustained by workers, whose efforts rarely attracted attention beyond their wages. Labor relations during the 1930s were often tense across Manhattan hotels. Employees endured long hours and modest pay. Staff at the New Yorker organized in the mid-1930s, joining unions that represented hospitality workers citywide. Management negotiated contracts establishing minimum wages and working conditions. Strikes were threatened, but largely avoided. Both sides recognized their mutual dependence and avoided actions that could damage the hotel's fragile stability. Permanent residents on the upper floors formed a distinct community within the tower. Some had lived there since the early Depression years, witnessing the hotel's transformation from financial strain to steady operation. Many were elderly, preferring hotel life to the responsibilities of maintaining private apartments. Others were professionals whose careers required frequent travel. A few simply preferred the structure and service of hotel living. These long-term residents developed relationships with staff that went beyond typical guest interactions. They knew clerks by name, favored particular dining tables, and received attentive service when making requests. In return, they provided consistent monthly revenue and rarely created difficulties. Management valued them as anchors who kept upper floors occupied regardless of seasonal fluctuations in tourism. The building also housed a less visible population. Its size created opportunities for anonymity. Some higher floor rooms were rented to individuals who paid in cash and registered under names that drew little scrutiny. The hotel asked few questions, as long as accounts were settled. This discretion appealed to those who valued privacy or required distance from public attention. By 1939, the New Yorker had defined its identity. It was not the most exclusive address in Manhattan. Establishments such as the Waldorf Astoria, New York, and the Plaza Hotel occupied that social tier. It was no longer new. Nearly a decade had passed since its opening. In a city that frequently demolished and rebuilt, 10 years marked maturity. The hotel settled into its role as a dependable mid-range institution offering modern amenities, central location, and reasonable rates. Senators stayed there when discretion mattered more than display. Baseball players chose it for comfort without ceremony. Business travelers relied on it when expense accounts required moderation. The building had survived its catastrophic timing, endured the Depression, and adapted to realities that eliminated many competitors. Radios in every room were no longer remarkable. Private bathrooms and chilled water became expected conveniences. The New Yorker earned its reputation as a solid, reliable hotel in a city that increasingly valued stability over spectacle. Financially, the situation stabilized without reaching the ambitious profitability originally projected. Mack Canner and his investors refinanced multiple times. Partial control shifted to creditors, yet revenue covered operating costs and debt obligations. Vacant rooms on the 40th floor no longer signified disaster. They represented capacity awaiting renewed demand. Another transformation arrived on December 7, 1941. That afternoon, guests gathered in lobbies and dining rooms, listening to radio broadcasts reporting the attack on Pearl Harbor. By evening, the United States had entered World War II. The rhythms of hotel life shifted once more. Occupancy surged almost immediately. Military officers arrived in Manhattan for headquarters assignments, logistics planning, and procurement work. The hotel's size and proximity to transportation hubs made it an ideal lodging site. Rooms that had once sat empty filled with Army and Navy personnel coordinating mobilization. Servicemen on leave streamed through New York throughout the war. The city functioned as a departure point for troops heading overseas and a return destination for those coming home. Soldiers and sailors sought affordable rooms near entertainment districts. The New Yorker accommodated them alongside permanent residents and business travelers. Wartime conditions altered operations. Food rationing affected menace. Certain ingredients became scarce, requiring substitutions and revised recipes. Guests understood the constraints. The dining rooms continued delivering dependable meals within the limits imposed by rationing. Quality remained consistent, even if portions and variety reflected national sacrifice. Staffing created additional challenges. Many young male employees enlisted or were drafted. Women stepped into roles previously held almost exclusively by men, working as bell staff, maintenance assistants, and kitchen employees. The hotel adapted to these changes as it had adapted to economic crisis, maintaining service standards while the nation mobilized for war. The front desk began hiring female clerks as male employees left for military service. Housekeeping departments expanded to meet increased demand. The telephone switchboard had always relied on women as operators, but during the war, they assumed additional supervisory responsibilities as men enlisted or were drafted. The New Yorker hotel adapted quickly to shifting labor realities. The building itself assumed new wartime roles. Its hospital floor, originally intended for guests requiring medical attention, expanded operations. Military doctors used the facilities to examine recruits and treat servicemen with minor illnesses and injuries. The operating rooms saw heavier use than at any previous period in the hotel's history. The arrangement proved mutually beneficial. The military gained accessible medical space in Midtown Manhattan, and the hotel generated income from facilities that had often been underutilized. Security tightened throughout the property, with military personnel and officials handling sensitive information staying on site. Entrances were monitored more closely. Room keys were tracked carefully. Access to upper floors received greater scrutiny. The building's immense size made total control impossible. Yet wartime conditions demanded heightened vigilance. Broadcast studios operated by NBC continued functioning within the hotel. War news, patriotic programming, and bond promotion campaigns originated from these rooms. Radio had become central to public morale and government communication. Performers who once entertained pro-war audiences now participated in broadcasts supporting enlistment and fundraising. Millions of listeners associated the hotel's name with the voices carried into their homes. Financial conditions improved dramatically during these years. Occupancy climbed toward 90%. Demand exceeded supply, allowing higher room rates. Conventions resumed as industries expanded production to meet military contracts. Engineers, manufacturers, and government contractors gathered in ballrooms that had once stood half empty during the Depression. Revenue levels finally approached the expectations projected when construction began. War also brought reminders of vulnerability. On July 28, 1945, a B-25 bomber lost in heavy fog crashed into the Empire State Building 14 blocks south of the hotel. 14 people died. Staff at the New Yorker watched smoke rise from the skyline. The incident underscored that even Manhattan was not insulated from wartime danger. Weeks later, Japan surrendered, and the conflict ended. By August 1945, the hotel had emerged stronger than when the war began. It had housed officers, accommodated servicemen on leave, and adjusted to rationing and labor shortages. Most significantly, it achieved the occupancy and revenue once imagined during its optimistic planning years. The immediate post-war period initially appeared promising. Veterans returned seeking employment. Former staff members were rehired, and departments expanded to meet continued demand. Business conventions resumed fully. Industries converted from military to civilian production, fueling economic growth. Through 1946 and into 1947, demand for rooms remained high. Competition soon reemerged. Wartime restrictions had halted new hotel construction. Developers now prepared projects that would increase Manhattan's room inventory. The New Yorker was approaching 2 decades of age. Mechanical systems required upgrades. Decor showed its years. New competitors would soon present modern facilities with updated design. The long-term residents, who had lived on upper floors throughout the Depression and war, were aging as well. Many had occupied their rooms for 15 years. The population increasingly consisted of retirees, rather than the earlier mix of professionals and independent eccentrics. The hotel continued accommodating them because their steady payments provided reliable income. The property's reputation evolved in subtle ways. It became known as a place tolerant of unconventional residents. Cash payments and requests for privacy rarely invited scrutiny. This discretion appealed to individuals valuing anonymity. Some were harmless eccentrics. Others preferred distance from conventional society for more complicated reasons. By 1948, the New Yorker had operated for 18 years. It had survived economic collapse and global war, emerging as a profitable enterprise. The building stood as evidence of endurance in an industry marked by frequent failure. Its mechanical systems functioned. Rooms remained occupied. Restaurants continued serving meals. Yet it was no longer innovative. Features that once distinguished it were now standard. Radios in every room were expected. Private bathrooms were universal in modern construction. Ice water on tap remained convenient, but no longer remarkable. Competitors had adopted the very standards the New Yorker once pioneered. The ownership structure had grown increasingly complex. Multiple refinancings, distributed authority among creditors and investors with competing priorities. Some sought immediate returns. Others advocated reinvestment in maintenance and modernization. Decisions emerged from negotiation rather than unified strategy, complicating long-term planning. The hotel's future depended on remaining competitive as new properties entered the market. Its advantages included central location, reliability, and scale sufficient to serve varied clientele. Even so, deferred maintenance began to show. Paint faded. Carpets wore thin. Mechanical systems required modernization. The stage was set for a chapter that would define the building's legacy in unexpected ways. Nikola Tesla arrived at the New Yorker in 1933 at the age of 77. He was financially depleted and largely alone. The inventor who had revolutionized electrical engineering through his work on alternating current had spent later decades proposing ambitious projects. Wireless power transmission, seismic devices, directed energy weapons that failed to secure sustained funding. Investors had withdrawn. His resources were exhausted. He previously resided at the Hotel Governor Clinton on West 31st Street. but unpaid bills forced his departure. The management of the New Yorker agreed to accept him despite irregular payments. Tesla retained respect among engineers and scientists who recognized his foundational contributions to modern electrical systems. Housing him brought a measure of prestige, even if his most influential achievements were long behind him. Room 327 on the 33rd floor became his final residence. The space offered views across Midtown Manhattan and contained a bed, desk, chair, and small bathroom. Tesla required little more. He had spent much of his adult life in hotels, preferring their simplicity. He never married and had no immediate family in America. His possessions fit within a few trunks. The daily rate was $2.50, an amount he struggled to pay consistently. Financial support came largely from the Westinghouse, electric as a modest pension, acknowledging his earlier contributions. The hotel accepted delayed payments and occasionally forgave accumulated debt. Management understood that evicting a celebrated inventor would invite unfavorable publicity. Tesla was elderly, reclusive, and posed no disturbance. Within the vast structure that had once symbolized ambition and modernity, he lived quietly during his final decade, an aging visionary residing in a building that, like him, had survived brilliance, hardship, and the relentless passage of time. He caused no problems beyond his inability to pay. Nikola Tesla established routines that rarely varied. He woke early, dressed in clothes that were clean, but increasingly worn, and left the New Yorker hotel on foot. He walked several blocks to the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue. There he spent hours reading newspapers and technical journals, filling notebooks with calculations and ideas that would never be realized. The library staff recognized him and allowed him to occupy his usual seat, without interference. His most notable routine involved pigeons. He fed them daily in Bryant Park, the green space behind the library. He purchased bird seed with money that might have been better spent on meals. He stood among the birds, allowing them to land on his outstretched arms, speaking softly in his native Serbian. Observers who watched this elderly man covered in pigeons had no idea they were witnessing one of the most important electrical engineers in history. Each evening he returned to the New Yorker, walking the same route he had taken that morning. He ate sparingly in his room, or occasionally in one of the hotel's dining facilities, when his finances permitted. He retired early. The pattern repeated daily with minimal variation. His life had narrowed to a small circuit between the hotel, the library, and the park. The hotel staff learned to accommodate his eccentricities. Maids who cleaned his room discovered stacks of notebooks filled with mathematical calculations and diagrams. They left everything undisturbed, understanding that he valued his papers above all other possessions. He remained polite, but distant in his interactions with employees, rarely engaging in conversation beyond basic courtesy. He seemed to inhabit his own world, stepping into the present only when necessity required it. On the morning of January 8, 1943, a maid knocked on the door of room 3327. No response came. The "Do Not Disturb" sign had been hanging there for 3 days. Hotel policy usually required respecting such signs, but staff had grown concerned. He was elderly and frail, and 3 days without contact was unusual even for him. The maid used her master key and opened the door. He lay on the bed fully clothed, hands folded across his chest. He had arranged himself carefully before death. His body was positioned with precision, as if composing a final tableau. The room was orderly. Papers covered the desk in neat stacks. The notebooks containing his final work sat exactly where he had left them. Nothing appeared disturbed. The maid withdrew and notified management immediately. A hotel doctor arrived within minutes and confirmed the obvious. He had been dead for at least a day, possibly longer. The apparent cause was coronary thrombosis. His heart had simply stopped. He was 86 years old. The hotel contacted the coroner's office. Officials arrived to examine the body and the room. They found no signs of foul play. Death had occurred on January 7, sometime in the evening or early morning hours. The "Do not disturb" sign became his final communication with the outside world. The staff sealed the room and awaited instructions regarding his belongings. Trunks and papers required inventory. Someone needed to claim the body. The unpaid bill remained unsettled. Before noon, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation arrived to examine the room and his papers. They had monitored him for years. His claims about death ray weapons and teleforce devices had kept him on a watch list during the war. Now that he was gone, the government sought to determine whether any of those inventions truly existed. The agents spent hours searching room 327, examining every notebook, loose paper, and diagram. They photographed documents and cataloged their findings. His nephew, Sava Kosanovid, arrived during the search and objected, insisting that the papers belonged to the estate and that federal agents had no authority to seize them. Wartime security concerns overrode his protests. Several trunks of materials were removed from the room under claims that they contained information relevant to national defense. Kosanovic filed protests with the State Department, arguing that his uncle's work was private property rather than government secrets. The dispute persisted for years. In the immediate aftermath of the inventor's death, federal authorities controlled access to his final writings. The Office of Alien Property also became involved. Although he had been a naturalized American citizen since 1891, his Serbian birth complicated matters. The agency, responsible for managing property belonging to foreign nationals during wartime, asserted jurisdiction over parts of the estate. Additional materials were taken from the hotel room, deepening confusion over ownership. Hotel management sought to resolve the situation quickly. A deceased guest was unfortunate but manageable. A deceased guest whose belongings triggered government investigation created unwanted attention. The hotel cooperated fully, providing access and emphasizing that he had died peacefully of natural causes. There was no scandal, only the quiet passing of an elderly man. The funeral took place on January 12, 1943, at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. The service drew a modest crowd. Engineers and scientists who remembered his contributions attended, along with a few representatives from companies that had employed him decades earlier. The broader public paid little notice. Newspapers published brief obituaries, but wartime events dominated headlines. His passing appeared as a minor story about an inventor whose prominence had long faded. His body was cremated. The ashes were placed in a golden sphere and initially stored in a cemetery in Queens. Years later, they were transferred to the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade. In the meantime, lawyers debated ownership of his papers and property. Room 3327 at the New Yorker was cleaned and restored. Staff removed all traces of his decade-long residence. Notebooks had already been seized by government agencies. Personal belongings were packed and given to Kosanovit. The room was repainted. Fresh linens replaced the old. Within days another guest occupied the space, unaware of who had died there. The hotel resumed normal operations. Guests continued to arrive and depart. One elderly inventor, passing quietly in his sleep, did not disrupt a building that had housed thousands. Those who had known him remembered a polite, eccentric man. They had encountered many unusual residents over the years. He seemed to be one more among them. Rumors began circulating almost immediately. The involvement of federal agents fueled speculation. Stories about death rays resurfaced. Individuals who had dismissed him as an impractical dreamer reconsidered the possibility that he had been developing genuine weapons technology. Government secrecy surrounding the seized papers intensified public curiosity. Conspiracy theories spread throughout 1943 and beyond. Some alleged assassination to prevent foreign powers from acquiring his inventions. Others claimed that the United States had confiscated functional weapon designs and was developing them in secret. A few insisted that he had transmitted his most important discoveries through unconventional means before death, ensuring their survival regardless of official actions. None of these claims rested on evidence, yet they endured. The reality proved far less dramatic. Federal investigators reviewed his papers thoroughly and discovered no practical military applications. The notebooks contained speculation, theoretical calculations, and ideas that remained entirely on paper. No working prototypes existed. His final years had been filled with imagination and mathematics, rather than hidden superweapons. No detailed blueprints for functional weapons were discovered. Nikola Tesla had spent his final years imagining devices he no longer possessed the resources or strength to build. In 1952, the government quietly returned most of the seized materials to his estate. The papers had never contained secrets worth guarding. The New Yorker hotel gained a lasting place in history, not through its engineering innovations or its grand opening, but as the building where one of the world's most important electrical engineers died alone in a modest room on the 33rd floor. The irony was unmistakable. Tesla had helped revolutionize power transmission and lay foundations for the electrical grid that illuminated millions of homes and businesses. Yet he ended his life unable to pay his own electric bill, dependent on the tolerance of a hotel that avoided evicting him largely to escape embarrassment. Room 3327 continued to house guests unaware of its former occupant. Management did not promote the connection. There was no perceived advantage in reminding visitors that a brilliant but impoverished inventor had died there. Nevertheless, the story circulated through word of mouth and scattered newspaper features. Over time, admirers made quiet pilgrimages to the hotel, hoping to stand near the place where he had taken his final breath. The building itself aged alongside the memory of its most famous resident. By the mid-1940s, the hotel was 15 years old. The wartime boom faded, and competition intensified. What had appeared modern in 1930 now seemed dated beside post-war construction. Mechanical systems required upgrades. DA Corps demanded renewal. The innovations that had once distinguished the hotel had become standard expectations across the industry. Tesla's death marked the close of one chapter. The hotel had sheltered a legend during his final decade and offered stability when few others did. That association endured longer than most elements of the building's history. Even decades after it ceased operating as a conventional hotel, many would remember it primarily as the place where Nikola Tesla died. Following his death, the New Yorker entered a gradual decline. The immediate post-war years suggested opportunity, but momentum dissipated. By 1950, the building's age was evident. Mechanical systems that had impressed earlier guests began failing regularly. The centralized ice-water system demanded constant maintenance. Pipes corroded, pumps deteriorated, and the refrigeration plant consumed vast amounts of electricity to provide a service that guests now regarded as ordinary. Throughout the 1950s, competition intensified. New properties rose across Manhattan with modern amenities and contemporary design. The Americana Hotel opened in 1962 with 2,000 rooms reflecting current tastes. The New York Hilton Midtown followed in 1963 with more than 2,100 rooms and expansive convention facilities, beyond anything the New Yorker could match. These newer hotels offered central air conditioning, integrated parking garages, and restaurants shaped by emerging culinary trends. They represented evolving expectations of mid-century travelers. The New Yorker could not compete in terms of modernity. The structure was more than 3 decades old, and updating it would have required significant capital. Ownership remained financially fragmented after repeated refinancings. Control was divided among creditors with conflicting priorities. Some favored extracting as much revenue as possible with minimal investment. Others advocated selling the property to developers who might replace it entirely. Agreement on a long-term strategy never materialized. Occupancy declined steadily through the 1950s. Convention business shifted to newer facilities. Business travelers preferred hotels with more convenient locations or modern accommodations. Long-term residents who had once occupied upper floors passed away, and younger professionals showed little interest in hotel living when affordable apartments were accessible throughout the city. The surrounding neighborhood also evolved. 8th Avenue had never carried the prestige of other Manhattan addresses. By the 1960s, conditions worsened. The garment district remained busy during daylight hours, but streets emptied after dark. Crime increased, and visible prostitution appeared near the hotel. Visitors walking from Penn Station toward Midtown theaters encountered blocks that felt increasingly unsafe at night. In response, the New Yorker lowered rates and standards. It began accepting guests who could not afford higher-end accommodations. Rooms that had once hosted senators and celebrities were rented weekly to transients. Identification requirements loosened. The building's vast size enabled it to serve divergent markets simultaneously. Convention groups occasionally occupied the ballrooms, and ground-floor restaurants remained active, while upper floors housed individuals turned away elsewhere. Staff reductions accelerated through the 1960s. The workforce that had numbered in the hundreds during wartime diminished to a minimal team, struggling to maintain basic operations. Housekeeping intervals lengthened. Repairs were postponed unless systems failed entirely. Visible neglect accumulated. Paint peeled along corridors. Carpets thinned and tore. Light fixtures went unreplaced. A structure that had once embodied ambition now illustrated the consequences of prolonged underinvestment. In 1967, financial crisis culminated in bankruptcy protection. Creditors forced a sale, and the property changed hands for $112 $5 million, a fraction of its original construction cost, even accounting for inflation. The new owners promised renovation and revitalization, yet little materialized. Control merely shifted to different stakeholders with similar incentives to minimize expenditures and extract remaining revenue. The 1970s brought deterioration that appeared irreversible. Entire floors stood vacant. Mechanical systems failed more often than they functioned. The once celebrated ice water service occasionally produced rusty liquid, when it worked at all. Heating operated inconsistently during winter, prompting frequent complaints about cold rooms and broken fixtures. Management responded with apologies and discounted rates rather than substantive upgrades. Crime within the building increased. The hotel had long offered anonymity, but it increasingly attracted individuals evading law enforcement or creditors. Drug transactions occurred in stairwells. Prostitution operated from rooms rented by the hour. Security was minimal. Remaining employees were often long, tenured staff lacking both authority and institutional support to enforce standards that management no longer prioritized. Several violent incidents further damaged its reputation. In 1972, a guest was found dead in his room after a robbery. Another death in 1974 was officially ruled a suicide, though suspicions persisted. Media coverage portrayed the New Yorker as a once grand establishment, reduced to sheltering criminals and the desperate. Preservationists debated its architectural merit. The building retained significance as one of the tallest pre-Depression-era hotels. Its Art Deco exterior, designed by Ralph Walker, maintained visual strength despite interior decay. Restoration, however, required millions of dollars to meet updated codes and modern expectations. Investors hesitated to commit such capital to a deteriorating property in a declining area. By 1975, demolition was seriously considered. Owners evaluated whether the land itself held greater value than the struggling hotel. Developers envisioned residential towers or office structures replacing the aging edifice. The Buildings Association, with Tesla, surfaced occasionally in discussions, but it did not appear sufficient to guarantee preservation. Public memory of his death there had faded, and for many, sentiment did not outweigh economics. Through 1975 and into early 1976, the New Yorker stood largely empty. Fewer than 200 of its 500-plus rooms were regularly occupied. The vast structure that had once symbolized optimism and scale now lingered in uncertainty, its future suspended between erasure and reinvention. The restaurants had closed. The ballrooms stood empty. Ground floor retail spaces that once attracted luxury tenants were now occupied by discount shops or left vacant. Revenue barely covered utilities and minimal staffing. Bankruptcy appeared unavoidable, and demolition seemed increasingly probable. In May 1976, an unexpected development altered the building's trajectory. The Unification Church made an offer to purchase the property. Led by Sun Myung Moon, the organization was expanding its presence in the United States and required large facilities for housing members and hosting events. The New Yorker provided enormous capacity, a central Manhattan location, and a price reflecting distress rather than market strength. The sale closed in July 1976 for $506 million. Less than half of what the previous bankrupt owners had paid 9 years earlier. The church acquired a 43-story midtown building with more than 2,000 rooms for less than the cost of constructing a modest apartment complex. The transaction succeeded largely because no competing buyers showed interest. Renovations began immediately. Electrical systems required upgrades to meet modern codes. Plumbing infrastructure was deteriorating throughout the structure. The heating system functioned poorly. Years of deferred maintenance had produced problems that demanded extensive time and capital. The church committed resources previous owners had withheld. Restoration was selective rather than comprehensive. The church's operational model did not require every room to meet full hotel standards. Upper floors were converted into dormitory-style housing for members. Rooms were simplified to essentials beds, minimal furnishings, and shared bathrooms on each floor. This approach allowed the organization to house hundreds at costs far lower than operating a traditional luxury hotel. Lower floors retained hotel functions. The church continued operating the New Yorker Hotel as a revenue-generating property, serving visitors attending events. Guest rooms on floors 2 through 15 were renovated to acceptable standards. Carpets were replaced. Bathrooms were updated. Mechanical systems serving these levels received priority improvements. The result was a hybrid facility combining hotel accommodations, dormitory housing, and large-scale event spaces. Ballrooms and meeting rooms were fully restored. Conferences and gatherings required expansive venues. The Grand Ballroom accommodated thousands, while smaller rooms supported workshops and training sessions. Public areas received greater investment than residential dormitory floors, reflecting their importance to the church's mission. The exterior underwent cleaning and repair. Decades of urban grime had darkened the Art Deco facade designed by Ralph Walker. Workers spent months cleaning brick and terracotta surfaces, revealing original tones hidden beneath pollution. Damaged ornamentation was restored or replaced. The building gradually regained a presence that suggested preservation rather than abandonment. By 1980, the New Yorker operated near capacity under this hybrid model. Church members resided on upper floors. Paying guests occupied renovated lower levels. Conferences filled public spaces. A structure once considered beyond saving functioned effectively under a model unimagined at its 1930 debut. Interest in Nikola Tesla revived during this period. Engineers and science enthusiasts began visiting room 3327. The church acknowledged the historical association in promotional materials. The room remained a standard guest space rather than a shrine, but arrangements were sometimes made for visitors wishing to see it. Its appearance remained ordinary, its importance rooted entirely in history. Speculation surrounding Tesla's death and the earlier seizure of his papers by the Federal Bureau of Investigation continued circulating. The church's ownership introduced additional layers to conspiracy narratives. Some claimed the property had been acquired to control hidden secrets. Others suggested experimental work based on Tesla's theories. None of these assertions had factual support, yet they persisted in books and articles devoted to mystery rather than documentation. In 1982, the building received landmark designation from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The designation protected the exterior from demolition or major alteration without approval. Interior spaces were not covered, allowing continued adaptation to operational needs. During the 1980s, the surrounding neighborhood improved. Redevelopment efforts near Times Square extended southward. Crime rates declined, and property values increased. The New Yorker's location regained appeal as Midtown redevelopment accelerated. Ownership now held a significant property in a strengthening district. The church's financial structure differed from that of commercial hotel operators. Maximum profit was not essential. Covering costs while advancing broader, organizational objectives was sufficient. This flexibility allowed the building to endure economic downturns that might have forced bankruptcy. Under conventional management, the dual function created a distinctive atmosphere. Hotel guests encountered church members in elevators and lobbies. Interactions were generally calm, occasionally awkward. Business travelers shared space with residents, heading to dormitory floors. Complete separation proved impossible within the interconnected structure. Guest reviews reflected divided expectations. Many appreciated affordable rates and central location. Others criticized dated decor and limited amenities. Rooms were clean but basic. Travelers prioritizing cost found value. Those expecting contemporary luxury expressed dissatisfaction. The hotel occupied a stable budget segment that required modest investment rather than constant reinvention. Mechanical systems remained challenging despite improvements. In the 1990s, the original centralized ice water system was permanently decommissioned. The refrigeration plant that had once symbolized innovation became economically unsustainable. Pipes were sealed, taps removed, and a distinctive feature surrendered to practicality. Tesla's cultural reputation expanded in the 1990s and 2000s. Biographies recast him as a visionary whose achievements had been overshadowed by rivals, such as Thomas Edison. Popular culture embraced him as a misunderstood genius who died in poverty despite reshaping electrical engineering. The New Yorker benefited from renewed interest. More visitors requested access to room 3327. Informal tours included mention of his final years. Some guests booked specifically because of the building's history. Drawn by architecture, legacy, and unconventional ownership, marketing began highlighting historical elements, including Tesla's residency, the Art Deco design, and landmark status. These themes differentiated the property from generic competitors. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 severely damaged Manhattan's tourism industry. Hotels citywide faced collapsing occupancy. The New Yorker endured because its dormitory component remained occupied regardless of tourism trends. Hotel revenues declined but did not determine the building's survival. Recovery unfolded gradually, and by the mid-2000s, operations again met the church's definition of profitability. The Great Recession of 2008 presented another test. Manhattan hotel bookings fell sharply. The New Yorker's hybrid structure again provided resilience. The organization's tolerance for lower financial returns permitted stability. When purely commercial operators struggled, a building that had entered bankruptcy in 1967 now demonstrated comparative durability. In the 2010s, the hotel's identity centered on affordability within an expensive city. Rates remained lower than many midtown competitors. The trade often involved dated interiors and modest amenities. Budget-oriented travelers expressed satisfaction, while luxury-focused guests criticized limitations. Online reviews mirrored this division. Room 3327 retained symbolic appeal. Some guests specifically requested it. Others learned of its history only after their stay. The room itself remained unremarkable: bed, desk, television, bathroom. Its significance derived entirely from events that occurred decades earlier. In the 2020s, the New Yorker continues functioning much as it did following late 20th century renovation. It operates as a hybrid facility capable of withstanding economic shifts that would destabilize a purely commercial enterprise. The building that opened in 1930 as the world's tallest hotel survived, not through sustained grandeur, but through adaptation. It endured the Great Depression by accommodating long-term residents. It navigated World War II by housing military personnel. It survived mid-century decline by lowering rates and expectations. After 1976, it endured by transforming into something more complex than a conventional hotel. Constructed to symbolize ambition during pre-Depression optimism, it opened at an unfortunate moment and never fulfilled original projections. It became widely recognized primarily because an elderly inventor died there in obscurity. It avoided demolition because a religious organization perceived value beyond conventional hospitality metrics. The New Yorker persists not because it consistently succeeded, but because it repeatedly adapted. In that sense, its trajectory mirrors the final years of Nikola Tesla in room 3327, defined less by triumph than by endurance.